Good evening. Hey. Thank you for attending our Wednesday night class. I'm pretty sure most of you have been in here, but if you haven't been, we have been talking about the Apocryphal books of 1st and 2nd Maccabees. And it's not something that we ordinarily study in the Churches of Christ, but I felt like it's kind of important for us to provide some additional context to the New Testament, something that we don't normally consider. It's not the first thing that comes to our mind whenever we're thinking about how the gospel message would have heard to the people who first listened to it. And so that's why I wanted to go over it, just kind of expand our horizons a little bit, learn a little bit more about what the first century church, how they would have accepted the gospel, and Jesus as a rabbi, and kind of their expectations whenever it comes to what the Messiah meant. So we've already gone through, we're probably about halfway through, if not a little bit more. We've probably got about 3 or 4 more weeks after this. We've already discussed a lot of things, so we've discussed, kind of the Pharisees, where they got their attitudes from, and that is from the family, the Hasmonean family that we've been talking about, and how they really relied on the Jewish laws and customs to maintain their identity and not just become assimilated into the Greek culture. We've talked about, the celebration of Hanukkah and how that is something that Jesus himself celebrated and how that came to be. And today we're going to talk about another Jewish holiday that was celebrated in the first century in Judaism. And so, quick recap. Last week, we talked about Judas, how he had really come to, that's Judas Maccabees, meaning the hammerer. He is kind of the hero of 2nd Maccabees in particular. And the first half of 1st Maccabees is really mostly about him. And so we kind of talked about his rise to being a military general, how he did everything exactly the way that the Old Testament judges and some of the Old Testament kings are exalted for doing it the right way. And he had incited even a few treaties with Lysias, and both of those treaties were kind of fell through. And then we ended talking about how Demetrius I had just returned, and he had Lysias and Antiochus V killed, and so he takes control of the Seleucid throne. Now, I told you that I would have a PowerPoint for kind of keeping all of these kings together, and I did not do that because the entirety of today Demetrius I will remain in power. So starting next week, I'll throw that up there because it's going to start to get convoluted. And we'll talk about, the Seleucids versus the Ptolemies, and it gets to be very political. But that's where we ended last week. Anybody have any questions before we get started? Amazingly, I did not have anybody come up and ask me a bunch of questions. I normally start off saying, well, we had some questions last week, and we didn't have any last time, so we'll just dive right in. So Demetrius assumes the throne, and the very first thing that he does is he tries to, kind of take in the situation. He, is listening to what all is going on in his region. And so he gets introduced to a guy named Alchemists. Now, Alchemists wants to be the high priest. You may have recalled that we earlier had a lot of infighting among the Jews between Menelaus and, who was the other guy's name? The other guy. And Menelaus wound up being kind of the one who took the high priest position, but he has since died. And so Alchemists wants to be that high priest. So he's going to Demetrius and he's saying, look, I'd like to be instated as the high priest, which would be more of like a political leader type position, right? In similar ways to the way, that's what we see in the New Testament as well, right? That the high priest is really kind of like a leader of the Jews.
Wouldn't that the high priest say for I forget which group now? To be high priest and just be a man.
Right, so we had the kings, and that didn't work out so well. And we had the judges, and they kind of, all throughout all of those, we still had the high priest, and they were kind of the continuity, and they were really kind of the ones who held a lot of influence whenever it came to which way the Jews were going to go on certain things. And so since the Jews have been stripped of having any sort of leadership, the Babylonians came in and said, you're not allowed to be your own leaders anymore, but you are allowed to have your own religious leaders. And so the high priests are really kind of the ones who guide the nation in political affairs as well. They really kind of they hold a lot of influence on the way people perceive both domestic and foreign policies. Does that make sense?
Levites.
The Levites? Yeah.
Wasn't that God promised them to keep that, even just in the Levites?
Right. So I'm glad you mentioned that. So that's one of the things that people who want to be the high priest say, that they need to be of a descendant of Aaron, right? Which is kind of, so Alchemist has that. He's actually of a priestly bloodline, and so he kind of has, near as we can tell, a legitimate claim to wanting to be the high priest. And in fact, we think that maybe he had previously been appointed by Lysias. Now, whenever he goes to Demetrius, what he does is he basically says, all this infighting, all of this uprisings among the Jews, and all of the problems that you've been having, that's because of Judas. That's because of the Hasmonean family. They are just warmongers, and it's all their fault. If you instate me as the high priest, I'll be sure to kind of calm these folks down, turn the people against them, use my influence as a religious leader to make sure that the people understand that Judas is, he's an insurrectionist, and he is not the one that they should be following. They should be following their high priest. And so that makes a lot of sense to Demetrius. He says, yeah, go ahead. Now, I should note that the authors of both 1st Maccabees and 2nd Maccabees do not think a lot of this guy. They think that Alchemist is just, they have not nice words for him throughout any time that they describe, like they can't say Alchemist without some derogative term in front of his name kind of thing. So it's actually kind of fun to go through. But Demetrius says, hey, yeah, that sounds good. And he handpicks a guy named Bacchides to go to Judah with Alchemists. And Bacchides was a governor of one of the regions that Demetrius is now over. So he says, you get promoted, you get to go in-state Alchemists. Now, they show up, and there are, in fact, divisions among the Jews. Some of them are very much on Judas's side, and others just kind of want peace, right? So he comes, and he's a priest, and, the people that holds a lot of weight with people, That's one of the decrees that God has, is as followers of him, to uphold his laws and to have a priest that is the intercessor between the people and God. And he shows up, and he's the priest. Yeah, it makes sense for us to follow him. And so, Bacchides doesn't see that there's going to be a whole lot of issues, and he heads back to Demetrius and leaves Alchemists in charge. And the Jews kind of think, well, this guy's been one of us. He's had some issues, before, but he's the best shot we got, and so they kind of accept him. And Alchemist decides they're friendly towards each other, and Alchemist immediately loses his credibility when he just inexplicably kills 60 people who decide to side with him. Right, so of the Jews that come, that they say, yeah, we'll join your side, Alchemist is like, that's great, I'm ready to have you on my side, except, it doesn't give an explanation. The nearest explanation we can give is that they had formerly supported Judas. Now they're turncoats, right? They're going to say, oh, well, now we support Alchemist, and he's like, we're not having any of that. You guys, I don't trust you, and so... and whenever he does that, he just loses all goodwill and good faith with the people immediately, right? So that means that Judas is the other leader among the Jews, and so they're going to go back to Judas. And he's going to assume back to his guerrilla warfare tactics, and he's going to actually force Alchemist to retreat. And so, because this didn't work out, Demetrius now has another issue, right, with the Jews again. He had sent Bacchides and Alchemists, and that didn't work. So now, this time, he sends a guy named Nicanor. Now, for the very, very astute, we've run into Nicanor before, but he was a very minor character, and I didn't really talk about him very much. And he sends with Nicanor a really big army, and he says, just squash them. In 2 Maccabees, this is one of the few places where the 1st Maccabees and the 2nd Maccabees kind of deviate on some of the details here. In 2 Maccabees, his mission is to kill Judas, instate Alchemist as the high priest. Right, so 2 Maccabees doesn't even mention Bacchides. It just skips straight from Demetrius is self-appointed king of the land to sending Nicanor with a big army. And so Nicanor does this. He makes a march on his way to Jerusalem, which still has the citadel. Remember that citadel? It's still there. And so he's going to find a safe haven once he reaches Jerusalem. But he's got to get there first, and the text really just kind of glosses over this. And like, oh yeah, he marches to Jerusalem. And there's a minor setback by Simeon, which is to say Simeon got defeated whenever he tried to attack them whenever they were on their march down. But we don't talk about that, right? So First Maccabees says that there's going to be some peace talks between Judas and Nicanor. But then Judas realizes at the last minute that Nicanor has this huge army, that he's actually being very deceitful in trying to hold these peace talks, and he escapes. He goes into hiding and says, and it praises him for his cunning and not walking into the trap, right? Second Maccabees has a very different perspective on Nicanor. It says that they do hold some peace talks, but that the conferences are held properly, right? It doesn't talk about there's suspicions, right? So Judas makes sure that he's posts a guard and that they're watching everything, but then it goes well. And so that's kind of like a first step to building trust. And so they do it again, and they build some more trust, and eventually they kind of become friends, actually. Like Nicanor kind of becomes, at least there's a mutual respect there between Judas and Nicanor, and it gets to the point where like Nicanor is telling Judas, you shouldn't have to worry about a lot of these things. You should like find a wife and settle down, and so he does, and like 2 or 3 years pass, and it's amicable. I don't know which one is true, but all of this disintegrates because of Alchemists, right? Alchemists comes back. He's not happy that he got relegated to the sidelines the first time, that he was never instated as the high priest, and he is out for revenge. So he goes back to Demetrius, And he says, remember how you sent Nicanor to march on Jerusalem? He hasn't done it. In fact, he's become friends with Judas, and they've like signed treaties, and in fact, he's even named Judas as his successor, which is not true. But Demetrius doesn't know that, so he sends a note to Nicanor, and he says, "What are you doing? Right? Like, I didn't send you down there to be friends with people. I want you to capture this Judas guy and bring him to me." And so now Nicanor is like caught between a rock and a hard place, right? He can't really do anything about it because he can't outright disobey his king, but he doesn't want to. And so fortunately, the problem is kind of resolved for him, because Judas is smart enough to figure out that Nicanor is being weird, right? He's kind of acting coldly towards him and is kind of distraught. And so he says something's up, and he just he lies low for a little bit. And so Nicanor, in searching for Judas, goes to the priests. He goes to the temple, and he says, "All right, where are you guys hiding him? Because I know that you guys are in cahoots." And they say, I don't know where he is. Like, legitimately, I don't know where he is. And they really didn't know where he was. But Nicanor, like, he gets mad at them, and he takes his arm and he points at the temple, and he says, "You figure it out, or I'm going to destroy this whole temple, and I'm going to build a nice altar to Dionysus right here," who is the Greek god of partying. So they are really distraught at that. He leaves them. He doesn't do anything, but he threatened it. And so they take to prayer pretty quickly. And it really kind of sets up this this grand face-off between Nicanor's big army on one side and Judas's scrappy army on the other side. And of course, Judas is going to be outnumbered, as he has been the entirety of the books. But they know where each other are now, and it's inevitable that this battle is going to happen. So Judas encourages his army, he equips them, not necessarily with shields and spears, but with good words and good faith. And he is just an inspirational guy. He tells them of this dream that he has, that the old high priest Ananias, it was Ananias and Menelaus, Ananias had somebody with him in his dream, a very distinguished person with white hair and just this very regal attitude and demeanor about him. And Ananias introduces this person as Jeremiah. And Jeremiah prays on behalf of Judas and presents him with this gold sword and says, God has listened to you and will continue listening to you. And so he tells them this story about his dream. Everybody gets all fired up. And then, of course, against all odds, Judas is going to win the battle. And his whole strategy is to go for Nicanor first. So he's kind of like a cut off the head of the snake, and then you don't have any problems. And that's exactly what he does. His strategy works out brilliantly for him. He kills Nicanor, and whenever the word spreads down the line from the battle that Nicanor has died, and they just kind of like, why are we still fighting? I don't get paid enough for this kind of thing. And so they rout them, and it gets to the point where everybody in the surrounding area is so encouraged that Judas is forming this rout that they all get behind him too. And so as the soldiers retreat into the tiny villages, the villagers come out and fight on behalf of Judas. And so nobody escapes. And so Judas takes the corpse of Nicanor, and he cuts off his head, and he cuts off his right arm, and he hangs them up on the citadel wall. And the purpose of this is to is to be a message to the folks that are in the temple, right, or in the citadel, right? You're still in the citadel, you're still a thorn in my side, but the people that are coming to be that you are supporting, the people that are here to get you out of here and supply you, and the side that you're fighting for, that's their general. You're welcome to keep siding with them if you like. And then also that right arm thing is because of the threat that he made towards the temple when he raised his arm and pointed at it and said, "I will destroy this temple." Sure you are. We'll see what God has to say about that. And so it's a message for the people as well to don't take that God does not take such threats lightly. And then Second Maccabees adds this wonderful detail that I just thought was so weird that I wanted to share with you, that he cuts out his tongue and feeds it piecemeal to the birds. So I don't know what that was about, but that's exactly what I said. Like, why would you bother putting that detail in there? But he did. So and so that whenever I kind of, at our introduction, I was talking about a celebration that the first century Jews had, this is it. They elect unanimously that this is going to be known henceforth as Nicanor's Day, and they celebrate that for hundreds of years. At least at the time, in the first century Jews, so Jesus would have definitely been celebrating Nicanor's Day during his time. So in what way? I mean, it's just a celebration. No, it's just a celebration. Just a feast day, just a day off, and just a holiday. And that is the end of Second Maccabees, right? So it concludes with this big climactic battle and the victory over the Seleucids and the retention of Jerusalem, and Judas goes out with a bang. Okay. So Judas finds himself in a interesting position that he wants to not be the only person that's fighting for his land, and he's a great general. He's a wonderful military tactician and an inspirer of the people. He's not a great politician. And so to that end, what he does is, he recognizes this about himself. And he sends an envoy to Rome, and he wants to broker a treaty with Rome, right? And it gives a whole lot of reasons that he wants to do this. Rome has defeated a lot of people. They don't have a king at this time, right? They have the 2 consuls and the Senate, but they don't have an emperor yet. So, it's very still kind of in the same wheelhouse of what would appeal to the Jews, right? And so they've also they're all about honor, which the Jews can kind of understand that as well. Like, hey, keep your integrity kind of thing. So Judas sends an envoy. It probably took a while to get there because it takes a long time to get to Rome. It took Paul a long time to get to Rome too. And he might have even sent this envoy before Nicanor was defeated. He sends a couple of people by name. One of them is Eleazar's son, Jason. So this is Judas's nephew, right? Eleazar was the one who was crushed by the elephant last week, and this is his son. And it kind of lends credence to this envoy because he's one of the Hasmoneans, right? He's still one of the family of Mattathias's line. And so they entreat, they get an audience with the Senate, and they get a chance to talk to them, and the Senate says, that sounds good. We don't necessarily like the things that Demetrius are doing anyway, and it would never be harmful for us to have another nation that if we come under attack, we can send a letter to you, and you guys send us some troops. We're never going to turn down some troops, so sounds good. And so the full treaty is given in the text, and generally scholars regard this treaty as being authentic. Like the Romans did this quite often, where they would sign a treaty with a smaller power that was in a strategic location for them. Now, the significance of this is that it might scare off the Seleucids, right? If the Jews have the backing of the Romans, and remember the Romans are already like breathing down their necks and telling them that they can't have a big army and all that sort of stuff, if they probably don't want to make them even madder. So it kind of gives a little bit of leverage to the Jews to say, hey, stay out of our cookies, or we have somebody in our corner that you guys are legitimately afraid of. Now, there's not a whole lot of evidence that Rome was particularly scrupulous about keeping these kinds of treaties. Normally, they would uphold their end of the bargain when it was good for them to uphold their end of the bargain, because honestly, what are the Jews going to do to Rome if they don't? If they just decide to break the treaty, there's not a whole lot of consequence for them. But the other thing that this is important is that it kind of legitimizes Israel's government, right? So now Israel has a formal government that's recognized by other nations. And that's going to come into play later, not today, but keep that in the back of your head. So what winds up happening is back to the nuts and bolts of the revolt. Nicanor is defeated. That does not sit well with Demetrius. He's not going to just let that happen. So remember that first envoy that he sent of Maccabees and Alchemists? He's going to send them again. And this time, he's going to send a really big army. This is about a month after Nicanor dies. He sends Alchemists and Maccabees, and he says, do whatever you got to do. He sends 20,000 men. He sends 2,000 horses. And, we're talking about, the scary phalanxes of the time with the shields and the whole structure. We're talking like that kind of military force, just to drive it home. Judas has about 3,000 men that he's able to muster in the month that it takes before this all happens. And the night before, everyone's looking at the odds and they say, this is not going to work out very well for us. And Judas says, well, of course it is. We've fought these kinds of odds before. And they say, During the night or in the days leading up to the battle, most of his army deserts him to the point that he's got about 800 men left. And they really try to talk him out of it then. Just retreat. Live to fight another day when you can gather more people. And Judas isn't having any of it. And so he says, well, we're going to lose if they come to attack us, so we're going to attack them. And so, they formed a line. The opposition has, Maccabees has. And Maccabees was on the right side, where most of his troops are. And so they're going to kind of do the same thing that they did to Nicanor. We're going to go straight for him and see if we can't make something happen. And so they do. They go straight for the right side, and they start winning. They start pushing them back, and they start making them retreat. And it's working out really well, except for there's that whole left-hand side, which kind of just makes a pincer movement, and it kind of comes around and sandwiches them, squashes them from behind, and they just catches Judas from behind, and he dies, which is a really big blow for the whole campaign of the Maccabees, right? I've kind of harped on this, how Judas has really been the heart and soul of this whole thing, that he's always been the exemplary military leader. He's the hero of Second Maccabees. In fact, Second Maccabees, maybe, I said that he doesn't mention Bacchides in the very first, that it just skips him. This is kind of one of the theories of why, is because Bacchides is eventually the one that's going to kill Judas. So maybe we just don't even mention him and we just, blot his name out of history just by absenteeism, right? But it's a hard blow. And so somebody's going to have to step up, because if they don't, then that will be the end of the revolt, and it will have all been for naught. So next week, we're going to talk about his brother who steps up. His brother is Jonathan. And for as good a military leader as Judas Maccabeus was, Jonathan is not. He's okay at it, but that's not his strong suit. Remember what I said was Judas's weakness was his being a politician, and that is where Jonathan is going to shine, and he's going to really kind of take the reins in that arena for the Jews. So it'll be interesting to see how he does that. We've got a few more minutes left. Are there any questions, any comments?
What's the difference between
An envoy and a convoy. Did I use the words? An envoy is like your entourage, like your people, and the envoy of like just a few people that are going to come out and meet you. Whereas a convoy is just a really long train of troops that's making their way somewhere.
I thought that's what you meant. It's convoy. That just needed to get that clarified for me.
Okay. Did that clarify it?
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
I missed enough weeks being gone.
We're on YouTube. I mean, it's a story, right? So things build on each other. So if you miss a week, I encourage you to go back on YouTube or just read it, right? Like it's right in any Catholic Bible, or Google it online, or well, it is. It's not hard to find. The last couple of weeks, I brought up some topics that we don't normally discuss in the churches of Christ. So I've had a couple of people comment on that. I just want to be clear. I don't necessarily believe the points that I'm bringing up, right? If I did, I probably wouldn't be communing with and worshiping in this particular setting. But yeah, I bring them up just to make sure that, just to encourage people to think about them, right? For you to do your own research, for you to be informed, and for you to use those as a means of learning about God, right? And some of these are very real debates, right? They're still debates to this day that scholars have, and that's okay, right? Like, sometimes we're very trusting as people, right? So somebody said this, so we're just going to take their word for it. Well, just because Martin Luther said something, that doesn't make it so. Like,
I would say, pick one of the only religion. Stay in Rome. And thank them.
Yeah, but Paul does tell us to test the things that people tell us, very much. He's very much about, like, don't just take something at face value.
I think what I'm trying to say is working your own salvation.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of what I'm trying to get at. And Second Maccabees is really just a great opportunity to bring up some of these issues, because there's a few things in there that are a little bit controversial, or just something that we're not exposed to a whole lot. Since Second Maccabees has kind of wound down now, it's officially closed, and we'll be going with First Maccabees for the rest of the next 3 weeks or so. I just wanted to take this last opportunity to bring up one more thing and kind of help lead a discussion on that. So I don't remember. Maybe you all remember the story of Heliodorus, excuse me. and the young men that struck him down and beat him whenever he came to approach the Hasmoneans, and he goes back to Antiochus IV, and he says, "What happened? You were supposed to take care of the Hasmoneans." And he said, "I tell you what, if you have an enemy, go send them as an envoy to the Jews, because they'll come back all beat up too." So feel free to look that one up again. It's in 2 Maccabees chapter 3 at the end. But there's several of these kind of moments that happen in the 2 Maccabees. Let me just read a couple of them to you. This is in chapter 10, starting in verse 29. In the midst of the fierce battle, there appeared to the enemy 5 majestic men from the heavens, riding on golden bridled horses, leading the Jews. They surrounded Maccabeus, and shielding him with their own armor, kept him from being wounded. They shot arrows and hurled thunderbolts at the enemy, who were bewildered and blinded, routed in utter confusion. 20,500 of their foot soldiers and 600 cavalry was slain. This one's in chapter 11, starting with verse 6. When Maccabeus and his companions learned that Lysias was besieging the strongholds, they and all the people begged the Lord with lamentations and tears to send a good angel to save Israel. Maccabeus himself was the first to take up arms, and he exhorted to the others to join him in risking their lives to help their kindred. Then they resolutely set out together, and suddenly, while they were still near Jerusalem, a horseman appeared at their head, clothed in white garments and brandishing gold weapons. Then all of them together thanked the merciful God, and their hearts were filled with such courage that they were ready to assault not only human beings, but even the most savage of beasts, or even walls of iron. There's a couple of other moments in 2 Maccabees. But what do you think of these encounters, these visions, these apparitions that the people have? The other one that I didn't read is horses appear above the city and are running back and forth above the city to protect it. I know I just kind of threw that out there, but we have things like in Daniel chapter 10, where we know that each of the nations have a guardian angel, right? Where one of them was delayed in coming because the prince of Persia had delayed him, right? And so we have this kind of peek behind the curtain on kind of spiritual warfare. But we have, Jesus talks about in Matthew 18 in the parable, right, of the what's the parable of the lost sheep, right? And he says, don't despise the little ones, because their angels in heaven face God every day. And we have Paul telling us in Ephesians chapter 6 that spiritual warfare is, an undeniable thing. Hebrews talks about it, right? Exactly. So, maybe we don't understand the exact physical manifestations of those angels, or how they come to be, or how they protect us, or how they are watching, or their relationships with nations and individuals. But just some more thinking about, right? Working out your faith, some more studying, some just thought exercises on that. I'd encourage you. I'll end with this quote. The fact that God created a realm of personal beings other than mankind is a fitting topic for theological studies, because it naturally broadens our understanding of God and what he is doing and how he works in the universe. Right? So I will conclude with that. Any last comments? Yeah, absolutely. And he could have. And he admits that. So, yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. And next week we'll talk about Jonathan.